Well, officially welcome. You know why I've asked Leigh to come on with us today, and that's to discuss the Chief of Staff role, which is the #1 hot topic in the assistant world right now. And I've got my own opinions on this, but I wanted somebody who was an absolute expert to come and take those questions, give you the realistic view of what this role actually is, because I first came into contact with the Chief of Staff in the City of London when I was about 2021. I know I'm starting to look like an angel here, so I'll turn that off. But what I know of the Chief of Staff role, Leigh, is not how it's been sold at the moment in our industry. And I found it a little bit concerning. I feel like we have set up assistants here to say, this is the ultimate next step for every single assistant. It's a carry on from the assistant role when you've hit the C-suite, and that's it. And I know that's not the case, but I could name 50 UK assistants right now who I know could step into that role, move into it and do it really successfully. But I also equally know 50 who wouldn't be comfortable in the role because they're being told it's one thing when actually, and I know that it's something quite different. So I wanted a really fluid conversation today with somebody who's an expert and has a whole background, has even written a book on it, which we'll get into it later. But just, I think in terms of rules for today, no question is a silly question, Leigh.
No, not at all.
Yeah. We want you to ask whatever's on your mind about this role. If it is something you're thinking about taking a serious career move, then ask away. Leigh's completely here for you, and I'm here to start firing some questions. Leigh, I think the best place to get started is with like your background and kind of how you got into the Chief of Staff role in the first place.
I've had such an interesting journey. So I started out in university. I studied broadcast communications originally because I wanted to go on TV. That is what it's like. Okay, I knew I wanted to go into communications, and I thought broadcast was the way. I ended up finishing my degree in business communications. And so I turned it around and just really started studying the facilitation of complex business strategies into various audiences, into messaging, talking. And so it's a mixture of marketing communications and business communications. And I started out, I'm not going to go through I started on the same line of work that my mother started out, which was telephone. And then I knew that wasn't for me, and eventually got fortunate enough to land a job at MSNBC when it first got started. So MSNBC is the joint venture between Microsoft and NBC. And so there's two aspects of it. There's MSNBC cable, the network, which is based out of Secaucus, New Jersey. And then there's MSNBC Online, which is more of the internet, the tech aspect of it, which I don't know if it's still based there, but which was based in Redmond, Washington with the rest of Microsoft. And so I was on the online version. So I was a producer for all of the online content. And I just knew that this job was going to get me my own show in Secaucus, New Jersey on MSNBC. Now, how I was connecting the dots, I have no clue. But anyway, so I ended up working at MSNBC in Redmond, and I got a taste of big corp and true business communications, behind the scene, the complexities of working with the field between corp and trying to organize strategies and get people to understand, in different worlds, right? And I fell in love. I literally fell in love. And so I let go of my dreams of being a TV star. And I truly just gave my heart to business communications, marketing communications, which took me to pure Microsoft. And so that led me into a core Microsoft role. Again, marketing communications, business communications. I ended up working on the consumer broad reach launch of Windows XP. And anyone that is as old as I am, you were talking about hitting your 40th. This is my last 7 months of my 40s, and I'm celebrating every single month.
I don't blame you.
And so Windows XP at the time was like the most amazing product and experience that had ever hit technology. And so I had the opportunity to work with all of the magazines, Popular Science. I was flying everywhere. I did the launch of Windows XP. It got me on the main stage. I was on stage with Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer, and just got a lot of fanfare around my work for Windows XP that Microsoft at the time was just starting this, and it was a combined role, business manager, chief of staff. They were just starting this new role, which at the time that they started it, it was more connected to finance. So they were going through an entire reorganization around finance. And so executives who did not have an expertise in this needed a right arm to say, okay, let me take care of how we're working with the controllers, what our P&Ls look like. And so a lot of the chiefs of staff had finance backgrounds when it first originally began. But for me, I had this communications background and got fortunate that the group that, you know, knocked on my door for me to take on one of these original roles was HR. So I cannot, for anybody who is, I mean, and we're talking large company, right? We're, you know, at the time it was like 100,000 people. Now we're 250,000 people or something, but even still 100,000 people. And so the way I view it is every organization, I mean, if you're running a 15,000 person organization, that is a company in itself. Right. And so, you know, we always talk about Microsoft as a company. Microsoft is many companies. And so I considered the HR portion of Microsoft its own company. And I was the chief of staff for the HR generalist team that and I don't even know if they still call themselves generalists. I think it's the HR business partners now or HR managers. But these were all of this was the arm of the company that saw all of the underbelly. And I went from like Windows and Microsoft being Windows and this glamorous thing to realizing in this chief of staff role, this company is held together with super glue and duct tape. Seriously. It's like, oh my gosh, I realize executives aren't these shiny objects, you know, and it's like they got flaws and they got insecurities. And it was the most eye-opening experience, and I fell in love with the chief of staff role.
And it's funny, you touched upon there when you were talking about the financial background. That was my first experience, the chief of staff role. So when I was 21, many moons ago, I was EA to the CEO of a disability charity in the UK, and our president was John Varley, who was the global CEO of Barclays Bank. And I had to spend quite a lot of time getting to know John's team, and the structure was really defined. I completely got it. So he had Matt, who was his chief of staff, and he didn't have a chief of staff when I initially started dealing with him. But Matt came over from the States, and he became the chief of staff for John. Claire was his executive assistant, Linda was his personal assistant, and then they had somebody doing a like kind of admin assistant role. But the roles were all really clearly defined, so I knew who to approach when I needed certain bits for the work that John was doing with us. And now, as it transpires, Matt has actually stayed in the UK, and he is now the CEO of Barclays UK.
Exactly.
So, and when I look at his background, and I shared it with some of the EPAA members in our Facebook group, and I said, this is his background. Like, there's nothing remotely assistant about it. Now, I'm not saying that assistants can't be chief of staff. I'm just trying to say what's being sold to assistants at the moment is not entirely accurate.
Right. And I can tell you this, a chief of staff literally should be at a level where they can step into a CEO role. And it is, I mean, that literally, so when I speak about the chief of staff role, you know, my background, there's many paths to becoming a chief of staff. So like I said, my background was in communications, marketing, PR. I ran the PR and AR and executive communications for all of Microsoft's server businesses. And so, really got that full scope of running a business. And so the way that I look at a chief of staff role is at any given time, you have to be able to wear any of the C-suite hats. Your CHRO, your chief human resource officer, has stepped out, and you have to go run that division until you get the replacement. Okay, chief legal officer, hire a company, hire a company. Don't. But when it comes to the CLO role, that is not something that I have to deal with negotiations and contracts and stuff. But the finite details of being in the legal department, that is not something that I would ever hire me to step in, even as interim. But yes, it's something that someone asked me once, well, what would you say to an EA who wants to be a chief of staff? Mm-hmm. And what I would say to that EA is, if that's what you want, go for it. Mm-hmm. I would never tell somebody that has a drive, a passion, a direction for their career that you can't do that. If that's what you want, go for it. They are two different roles. And I can tell you this, no one would hire me to be their EA. As much as they wouldn't hire me to be their chief legal, you would not hire me. And it was funny because I had the beautiful honor of having my previous EA, who was my EA at Microsoft, and she visited me the other day, and we were just laughing. And she said, "Oh my gosh, we were just laughing about the things that I couldn't do." And I did a recording with her, and she just said, "I'm just imagining the amount of times you've gotten lost that I've had to, give you the directions. I'm just imagining someone trying to hire you as an EA. It would be disastrous." I truly respect the EA role. And the issue that I see is the industry trying to tell the EA function, and not just EAs, but trying to tell the C-suite or trying to tell the rest of the organization that the EA function is like a junior role that needs to step up into something else. The EAs that I've worked with are, a true EA in a office of the CEO, to me, that person is part of the leadership team. It's about experiencing and understanding and respecting the EA function as an executive position, as the leader and seniority experience that person brings to the table. You shouldn't have to give that function a new title to get respect. And the function by itself is an amazing role.
Yeah, and this is where what is happening here. So we've got a lot of assistants in the UK. Frankly, they're tired, and I'm sure some of you from Europe and internationally probably feel the same after the COVID pandemic. They've been run ragged, working all the hours God sends to do their bit during the pandemic. They're coming out, and there's a lot of dissatisfied professions here at the moment, Leigh. I mean, half of the UK is on strike every week at the moment. There's a lot of unhappy professions, but if I relate it back to assistants, it's okay, well, I'm going to get that influence and that respect and that higher pay rise if I just switch my job title to chief of staff. And I don't think it's assistants' fault necessarily. That's what's being PR'd in our industry at the moment. And you've just hit the nail on the head with it, essentially. So I think to help kind of assistants who are listening now, what are the fundamental differences? I mean, what are the core parts to the chief of staff role? Because we're starting to get mishmash job titles. So just so you know, I sent Leigh, there was an advert. This is a UK advert, and I'll pop the link in the chat in a moment so people can have a look at it. Nothing against this firm. They're in the technology sector, blockchain in the UK, and they have advertised a role yesterday. It says EA stroke chief of staff, and I sent it straight to Leigh saying, this is what we're doing and we're here now. So it'd be good to know from the expert, what are the top parts of this role.
And it was interesting because even I run across a few jobs I've gotten contacted, and there are many different jobs. So the EA and the chief of staff role are, that's just two different jobs. A business manager and a chief of staff, two different jobs. And on LinkedIn, someone had posted in the chief of staff networking group that I'm in, this EA, just similar to the one that you were saying, this EA/chief of staff role. And I made a comment. I said, okay, is this an EA role or is this a chief of staff role? Because I can tell you most chiefs of staff, just so you know, most chiefs of staff, if it's an EA/chief of staff role, a chief of staff would not be qualified to do that job. They're not the same position. So if you think about the core functions and fundamental differences, first of all, it blows my mind to even talk about fundamental differences. It's like saying the chief marketing officer and the chief finance officer. You don't even get those confused. There's core fundamental differences of the two positions. The EA role, and you all are the experts there, not me. I have had the absolute honor and privilege of working with just some of the most amazing EAs. And so I go off of that partnership, which is critical. But that role is focused on managing, strategizing that executive's time, that executive's, presence, where they should be, and prioritizing, everything that is dealing with how do we make this person show up and be the best that they possibly can. Mm-hmm. Imagine that for the executive's business. That is the chief of staff role. The chief of staff role looks at the overall business and says, how do I make sure that this business shows up and is performing and running the best that it can at all times, that everybody in this organization feels they are connected to the mission and the vision, and every single thing that they're doing is driving towards that goal. So that's true. I mean, in a very simplistic way, that truly is totally different roles.
And I had predicted this was going to happen, and I'd had a conversation with I've got a new board of directors at EPAA, and we held our first board meeting recently. And actually our chair is in the background today, and I think a couple of board members might be on, but I think we were all just kind of stumped because one of our board members, she's just come out of the EA role into management executive. That's the kind of, because of the sector she works in. And she was saying, but it's a whole process. Like she said, it looks to what, from the research she's done and this role in her sector, she said it's like a 3-year process for me to move into that role. She's in law, not a qualified lawyer, but she was basically just saying she felt quite uncomfortable with this. Okay, I'm here and I'm suddenly going to hop into this. And now we're getting these dual titled roles, which I said was going to happen. I've worked for the world's biggest recruiters, so I know what recruiters do to kind of, I'm just going to say it, pimp up roles to make it look more than what it is. And some of my members have got really, really strong feelings around this and feel also that it's kind of been missold, and that we're not, I mean, I'm totally up for any assistant moving into that, but I want them to take the right steps, get the right support, and not have them pushed into a role that they might fail at because they haven't got all their ducks in a row and weren't given the right information.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would say, I mean, there's a couple of significant reasons behind why I believe, at least for the EAs that I've spoken with, it's not that they actually want the chief of staff role. The chief of staff role, it's, oh my gosh, EAs are powerful. Seriously. EAs are powerful. And I've had an EA that went from an EA to a business manager and went back to the EA role because,
oh, wow.
Yes, oh, absolutely. One of the main reasons, and I'll just be very blunt about this, is the pay. The market dictates that an EA function has a certain compensation model. That compensation model, I have never seen match a compensation model of the C-suite. And in fact, unless you're very, very senior, the compensation models don't even necessarily match that of directors, let alone VPs and SVPs and EVPs. And so if we have equated growth in our career directly to compensation, then of course, if in an organization, if this individual is making compensation, if you're not talking about the EA role, but you're talking about managers, project managers, et cetera, and they've have the same compensation as some of the project managers or associate managers, you relate that to them being at that level, which is false. And what I say is change the market, change the respect and the pay of the EA role, because to me, to be a true EA, just like I said, there are individuals, even chiefs of staff without EA backgrounds, who are not chiefs of staff. Okay, so a chief of staff is the person at the C-suite that sets the strategy, that sets the operational process, that sets the overall structure of how this organization runs. So if you take the CEO and you could break off running the business of the CEO, so that person can look at the strategy, the mission, can look at the overall picture and how's the business, in terms of what our future direction is, in terms of how we're hitting those numbers. You break off the actual operations and getting the business running, that is a chief of staff. But if your chief of staff they sit at the meeting, they're taking notes, they're being given a list of things, you have to go do this, 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 and this, and they're transactional, that is not a chief of staff.
Mm-hmm.
So that is what I call a business manager. Now, the business manager role is a junior role to the chief of staff role. So the business manager, so I've always, in a chief of staff role, I've always had business manager, or at least I've had one business manager. And so a business manager is just a phenomenal role that works your butt off to learn how to run a business. And you're responsible for, okay, I need you to go collect all of the budget priorities for next fiscal year from every group, and this is the format I need you to use, and they go do it. We need to sit down and we need to have a rhythm that we meet every week to go through X, Y, and Z, and they execute on that. Mm-hmm. The chief of staff is the one that says the plan, this is where we need to happen. So I know in Q2, it's going to all be about product. So everything that we do in our reviews have to be focused on, did we have the right roadmap for the product? Q3, we have to actually start planning for the next fiscal year. So exactly what do we need to do in Q3? Q4, we have to look back and get ready for the, so the chief of staff has to look at the full business and the model of running that business. It is not a catcher. Is no way a catcher that says, okay, tell me what to do and then I'll go do it. It's about me saying, this is what needs to be done. And either I have to roll up my sleeves and go do it, or, I have a business manager. I've always had a communications manager, engagement manager. So I am a fortunate chief of staff that have always had resources. I could not imagine a chief of staff who does not have resources. And I would say if other members of your C-suite have resources and you're a chief of staff that is acting solo, either you need to take a step back and say, you need to really understand the chief of staff role and the value that I can bring and request resources, or be okay with knowing you're not truly in a chief of staff role.
And so we've got assistants on here, and I know they've told me they have hit the lid. They've done everything they can do in the assistant world. And do you know what? As an association, we're fully admitting that now. I mean, I'm a millennial CEO. I've seen the research that people will go through lots of different careers now. They're not going to come in like I did, secretarial college at 16 and work their way up and stay there until retirement. They're going to chop and change and do different things. And so we fully kind of embrace that. And that's why, we've started to say to some members, if, we're not the place for you to become a chief of staff, but we want to kind of point you in the right direction. But what about the assistants who have, and there are some of them on there, I'm just looking at some of the names, they have told me they've hit the lid. They've had a wildly successful assistant career. They've delivered big things for their organizations and their execs. And they do think this is really the right next step for them. Mm-hmm. What would your advice be on how they take that next step and get it right? Because, these are high performing assistants. They will want to do it to the best of their ability. They won't want to go into a role and sink and fail because they haven't had the right
advice
or knowledge and information?
I would say that you are stepping into a new position, and it's just like so it's lonely being a CEO. It's lonely being a chief of staff, and it's lonely being the EA to the CEO. Your team really are the three of you. So the relationship between the EA and the chief of staff is significantly important. The relationship between the EA, the CEO, and the chief of staff, and then what I call the three-way. That relationship, because that is your trusted triangle, right? And I had the most interesting conversation with Lisa Brummel, who used to be the EVP of HR at Microsoft. And at the time, chief of staff at Microsoft could only get to, and so it's manager, group manager, director, senior director, then you go GM, VP, SVP, et cetera. At the time, a chief of staff could only get to senior director. A chief of staff role couldn't get to a GM level role. And so I had a conversation with Lisa Brummel, and I said, look at what these chiefs of staff do. They literally could step in for these EVPs, let alone a VP, let alone a GM. They can step in for EVPs. Why on earth can they only get to compensation at the senior director level? And Lisa told me something that will always stick with me. She says, because that's what the market commands for that function. And if you're doing that function, then it's about, it's about you being an expert in doing that function and accepting that this is what the market pays. If what the market pays is not good enough for you, then you have the opportunity to go to a different function. And so I would say the same thing. Now, I disagree that chief of staff, and now they've changed it, chief of staff can get to GMs and stuff, but I disagree that there should be a cap on a chief of staff, just like I disagree that there should be that cap on the EA. But me disagreeing isn't going to change the market and what the market is going to compensate.
Yeah, definitely. So I've seen lots of debates, shall we say, on LinkedIn over the last few months, and I'm quite a hot-headed debater, but I've been refraining and actually restraining myself during the lockdown. But I've seen another debate quite recently around the chief of staff role, and somebody had put a post up, and there was people who were doing the role, chief of staff role, underneath saying, well, that's not what it is, that's an EA role, and actually you've got to have a degree or an MBA. What is your thinking around the qualifications academia part of it? Would you be expected to have an MBA or degree, or be working towards one if you do step into that role?
I have an MBA.
Yeah.
I have an MBA. You have to realize, to me, I would never take a chief of staff role that wasn't considered peer and part of the C-suite. So to me, my peers are the chief marketing officer, the chief legal officer, the chief finance officer, the chief human resource officer. They are my peers. They are not more senior than I am. And when we're at the table, my voice matters equally, if not sometimes, depending on the topic, more. I have one-on-ones with those C-suite individuals. I am the connective tissue between their businesses, their lines of businesses, and how we need to be successful as a company overall. So if that sounds like something you want to do, look at the chief of staff role. Now, if you just want the title, you want the pay, as we've seen, the role is getting so convoluted because honestly, a lot of companies are wanting to not hire and pay for a chief of staff. And so they're giving an EA a little bit more to take on really a business manager role. But just know those EA/chief of staff roles aren't paying what business managers even get paid.
It's the oldest trick in the book over in the UK. I mean, seen it time and time again. Now I did have a split role when I was an EA in the FTSE world in Hayes, and I was EA to some of the C-suite, and I was also the national channel lead for what was Hayes PA and secretarial. And they basically just gave it to me and said, sort of strategize this part of our recruiting arm, because Hayes recruits in over 20 specialisms. And I was the first non-fee earner in the company globally to be asked to come into a channel lead role. And they were like, here it is, here's what strategy there is. Basically, just sort it all out, strategize, get the consultants all over the UK and Ireland. And frankly, Leigh, I'm not from a degree educated background, you know, I'm not, that was never on the cards. It was not an opportunity. But I decided to go for it and get stuck in. And I found that even as an assistant with this side arm, as I used to call it, I had a real flair for strategy and creativity, and like I cultivated this brand, and Hayes let me run wild with it, to be fair. And it was great. Like it really added to my EA role. And it was around the time of the 2008 global recession. So that's what I'm trying to get at, that, you know, ordinarily pre 2008, you would have had a single person doing that role. And then obviously.
And you can't, right. It's just like I know in tech right now, if you've seen the major layoffs, and too many of the people that I know have been impacted by that. My previous EA was impacted by the tech layoffs. And so, yeah, a lot of times we're seeing that consolidation. And even one debate that I got into on LinkedIn was, well, but a lot of these companies, they can only hire one. And so that's why you're seeing this EA/chief of staff. And I said very clearly, if a CEO can only hire one role to help support and run their office, that is their EA. It is the number one most important role in that office. But respect the fact that they don't need a subtitle to have a voice and to be respected. I'm a huge proponent for fighting for the respect of the EA role, because I know how significant that job is. And so instead of diluting the role and trying to add on another title, let's fight for the respect that the EA function itself deserves.
Well, I preach to that. I mean, it's kind of ironic, because when I went to what we called secretarial college when I was 16, it was a very respected profession in the UK. Employers knew exactly what they were getting. We had this very crystal clear pathway. I knew as a 16-year-old that I wanted to become a top assistant in London. I knew that, and I knew what the steps were to get there. It was still hard for me because I was a bit rough around the edges and a little bit mouthy. And
I'm sure you still are.
Yeah, I think the members would agree with that, certainly, of EPAA. So my career has been an interesting one, and I call it a little bit of ducking and diving. But one of the big things I found, even to get up to the higher levels of the assistant role, was getting mentors to really help that transition. So is that an option for assistants now who are listening? Is, you know, as part of that process of them moving from assistant to chief of staff, would you recommend that they get a mentor or a coach as part of that journey to make sure they have a smooth transition?
Absolutely. I think, first of all, no matter what role you're in, so I have had many mentors for many things. So I have mentors. So let's say at one point it was specifically around the technology. So I had mentors in the engineering, or a mentor in the engineering organization who would help me and understand the technology. Around the executive office, I had mentors who were senior level executives and could help me tread a little softer, because I, as well, I get a little ruffled at times, and I'm not afraid, you know, just like I said, my voice matters just as much as anybody else at the table. So I'm not afraid to use that voice. But mentors help you in so many different ways that I would say absolutely, even if they're peer mentors. So it doesn't necessarily always have to be someone that's, you know, 2, 3, 4 levels above you. You can do peer mentors. You can do mentoring. I've done for chiefs of staff, for specifically Black and African American chiefs of staff at Microsoft. I've done a senior chief of staff mentoring ring where it's people my same level, and we get together and we're supporting each other and understanding, okay, what are you using? How are you doing this? And so I would also suggest mentoring rings. But for an EA looking to be a chief of staff, I would say the exact same thing that I would say as HR business partner looking to be a chief of staff, as a controller looking to be a chief of staff, as an executive comms manager looking to be a chief of staff. Whether you're looking to be a chief of staff, whether you're looking to go into marketing, whether you're looking to go into project management, you have to learn the role. You have to be comfortable in the role. You have to take on projects. So I don't think I know one EA. Now, I don't know the personal assistant role. I've been in big corp and in tech, so I don't know the personal assistant role. So let me just be very clear. But the EA role is, to me, the most trusted partner in any organization. And the EA partners that I have had are just the most amazing, beautiful people. And so I will protect that role at all costs. And it is one of those things that if you're looking to move to a different function, then do what everybody would do when they're looking to learn that function. Volunteer, take on projects, take on stretch. Not like you're not working 60, 70 hours a week, and so you have all of this extra time to do this. But if that's what's important to you, but I would also say if it's important to you because you don't think the EA title is enough, then work with me, work with Victoria. Let's make the EA title be enough. Let's get enough voices out there to say, this is such a senior experience position that we start getting the EA title the respect that it deserves. If it's because of the pay, then let's fight for that too. I think the EA function is enough in itself. But if you actually want to do a different role and you want to do the chief of staff role, I would say go into business management. Make the transition to business management where you're the transactional catcher and deliverer. And once you are good at, you can set up your rhythm, you can set up your budgets, the fiscal year flow, you know how to do OKRs, you know how to track the KPIs, you know how to work with each team in terms of resetting expectations. Now, once you learn that and then you can direct it, that's what a chief of staff is.
And has anyone got any questions, any thoughts, feelings? Please do.
It's really quiet.
Yeah, put them into the chat. We'd like no question, even if you think it's a stupid question, please feel free to put it on, or if you want to come on the camera and microphone, we'll be happy to see you. But I'll carry on chatting for now because here's my worry. If I look at the UK market, and I don't profess to know the global market, even what's going on with assistants, because it's very, very different culture to culture. I mean, there's some countries that I can't even be an assistant because I'm a woman. I've trained in, there is, that still does exist. But for the UK, there are assistants I know in the EPAA membership, and we've got a hand up from Kay, or we'll come to you in a short second, Kay, but there are assistants who I know would absolutely smash the chief of staff role. But here's my other problem. I'll sit there and go, go and get mentor, do this, do that. That's just my advice. But then they'll go on the job boards, speak to the recruiters, headhunters, and there's so few chief of staff because it's not a profession in its own right here because it's not big enough. I think that's what it is. Now, I know there's networks been formulated now, and that may grow over the years. It's hard to say. But just so people in the UK know, EAs and PAs, we're not a profession in our own right anymore. So Boris Johnson's government quietly, I found out about it, and I did tell the EPAA members, but they just sort of ignored me. But Boris Johnson's government quietly took us as a profession in our own right and mopped us under the admin umbrella. So the figures you see from the Office of National Statistics here now, which is what we use in the UK as a barometer for kind of vacancies, job losses, and where I can cut data by profession. We don't really even know how many EAs, PAs there are now because we've just been mopped up under everybody that's in an admin type role. And so I know for the UK around about 2007, it was quoted that we had 650 to 750,000 assistants in the UK. The FT, I did an article with the FT, I think it was around the start of lockdown, and they did their own research, and they said to me, you do realise your profession is about 153,000, like around about now. And we'll never know what the true figure is, but the chief of staff, it's still such a new role here, I feel.
And it's such a fraction of, so I would highly doubt the chief of staff role has taken off significantly. And I can speak more about the US, but from what I've seen, and I'm always, even though I'm doing my own thing, it's like I miss having that corporate attachment and running that business. And so it's like I'm always looking for fractional chiefs of staff role. And so, yes, I get contacted a lot about the chief of staff role, and it's out there. But I would say the executive assistant, so I mean, just like you have tiers, I would put a business manager in the same job function as a chief of staff, even though a business manager is not actually making the decisions, isn't actually saying, okay, this is what you need to do, CMO or CPO. It's still in the same job line. Just like in marketing, you have a career trajectory for marketing, you have a career trajectory in the chief of staff. It's just how you start in that chief of staff realm can be from various places. I am a huge advocate and proponent, as I think you hear very clearly. And whenever I speak about the chief of staff role, whenever I get a platform or even coach about the chief of staff role, one of the most significant partnerships is the EA. And so you will always hear me talking about the EA position and leaving the actual function of the EA to the EA experts. People think that, oh, you're the chief of staff, you can tell the EA, and it's like, also, if you are ever an EA for a CEO and that person asks you to report to the chief of staff, I would pause. I would pause.
Because that is happening a bit here.
I would pause. Now, there are people in different financial situations, so I would never say you can't take something that, you're in a financial situation and you need the role and it's the right fit, fine. But EA to the CEO should report to the CEO.
I preach to that. Kay, I know you don't want to be on camera. Do you want to come on the microphone? I'd love to hear your voice.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Leigh. I've really enjoyed it. I expected you to say what you did, and I'm really pleased that even in the chief of staff world, that the EA is seen, as a important and critical role in its own right. And I've been reflecting on the chief of staff over the past few weeks, having seen these debates going on, and I think this argument isn't actually new. If you go back to what you've been saying for years, and what Adam in particular has been saying for years as well about this, you've got the PA and the strategic EA, and I think that's that level that's missing, is that I feel like there are some EAs out there who aren't actually operating at a strategic EA level. And I think until, as a profession as a whole, we are all operating at that level, we're not going to get the respect that the position deserves. In my role, I know recently I was taken aback because I got asked by my boss, what do you think our people objectives should be this year? And I went, oh, well, why are you asking me? You have a head of HR, but he wanted my input, and that was amazing, and they did get put forward into our people plan. But it's that lack of understanding of what a true EA role is, and some of us get it, some of us don't. My boss is just messaging me now, so I just got distracted by seeing my Teams ping up.
I know.
But I think it comes back to that, and I think because there isn't that understanding of what that true strategic EA role is, it's what these chief of staff roles are being penned as. That role already exists. They don't realise that an EA is so much more capable of doing more than just the diary management. I can diary manage in my sleep. Give me some other stuff to do. Give me some projects. Give me some meaty things. That's why I go outside and I'm doing my master's in organizational psychology, because I want to start seeing things at that balcony level. I hate using that term, but I can't think of a better expression to go, what are we doing at the strategic level? And that's where I'm pushing myself. I don't want to be a chief of staff. I have now made that decision. It is not for me. I don't want that responsibility of making those really important decisions that actually could see your business fall down the toilet. That's not something that I want to have, but I want to be involved in that process. And the EA role for me is perfectly situated to do that.
Mm.
Oh my gosh, I wholly agree with you. And just like the EA role is getting diluted potentially with individuals without the true, I mean, when I talk about an EA, I'm talking about an EA to CEO, so that business head. And you have to have, when you're operating at that level, you have to have the skills, you have to have a voice, you have to show up at the table. And just like the EA role, it's happening to the chief of staff role as well. Honestly, that's why I wrote the book. That's why I started Chief of Staff Leader Circle, because there's two things that happened in a very short period of time. One, I was going out and looking for other C-suite roles. And so I've been, you can say that the chief of staff really is equivalent to a chief administrative officer or a chief operating officer, depending on, there are certain things that would make it different. Like if the operating officer had IT, I don't see the chief of staff running your IT systems and structures. But someone had told me, Leigh, you should take, because you could step into a CEO role tomorrow. You should take chief of staff off of your LinkedIn profile, because it diminishes your executive level, the executive level that you are. And that's because of this comorbid EA chief of staff. Are you just doing this or that? And the other thing that happened is I got contacted by a recruiter that said, hey, we have this chief of staff role, blah, 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 blah. And as she started describing the role, I paused her and I said, this actually doesn't sound like a chief of staff role. So are you sure this is a chief of staff role? And she said, oh, we actually convinced the client. So this was a recruiting firm. We actually convinced the client. It was a business manager role, but we felt we could get more candidates if we gave it the chief of staff title. And I basically said, then why are you contacting me?
And this is happening over here. And I have to be honest with you, having spent a good chunk of my career as an EA in the recruitment world, and I loved every minute of it, but I also know what goes on in the recruitment world. And this has started happening in the UK. The recruiters would be the last place I would be taking title advice from, I'm afraid to say. And I've got some recruiters who I adore in the UK, like really, really adore. But I wouldn't take direction from them about changes in job titles. Sorry, I just wouldn't. And I have seen it start to happen here. And I guess, again, going back to what my concerns are with the assistants who are probably ready to go into a chief of staff and have got quite a lot of what is required, is there's just not masses of roles, chief of staff roles here. So what do they do? Just sit it out? Yeah, do they just sit it out, or do they then all fight internally within their firm to get rid of the EA role and get it molded into a chief of staff role? So that's my husband in the background. Hello, husband.
You probably hear. I have people who are getting up. This is about 7:30 in the morning here, so I have people getting up and getting ready to head out of the house. But it is interesting, because what you experience as an EA and the dilution of the role, the ceilings, that's what a lot of chiefs of staff are going through as well. And to me, the real push isn't just saying, okay, then I have to go with what the rest of the industry is doing. I got to go. If enough people, you say, okay, but I'm just one person, add up those ones and those ones and those ones. Victoria, if you and I and enough people are out there actually clarifying what this role is and what the impact of these true valuable positions can be to a CEO, to a C-suite, to a company. And that's why I say, you know, one of the things that I say is every CEO should have a chief of staff. And the reason I say that is because it should already be a given without it needing to be said that you have a strong EA. That is I didn't even feel the need to say that, because it's like, how did you make it to CEO if you didn't already know that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we've got our own, I say issues, perception problems here, which we don't even help ourselves as assistants. I mean, just during the lockdowns, I've had tiaras, lots of gimmicky stuff. We're wearing nurses' uniforms again. I've got my red cape on. Did you know I'm Mary Poppins? I'm Superwoman, Mad Woman. And, you know, some of the perception we give out, and I keep, you know, I've said this to EAs over the years, and some of them are like, yeah, totally get it, Vic, people like Kay. And then others are like, oh, you're being a bit of a spoil sport. We're just trying to have a fun in a cruel world. And I'm like, yeah, I want to have fun, but I'm trying to challenge employers and HR departments on this role. And me telling them that I wear a crown and I do it like a boss, and here I am with my nurse's cape on, it doesn't help matters. So we've got our own set of perception issues that we could actually just do quite quickly as assistants to change some of that here. But there's a really good comment from Emma in the
one
chat.
question. I apologize, Emma. If I can just ask one question, Victoria, before you move on. Are the male EAs getting that same type of perception?
It's interesting. So we were the first organisation in the world, PA organisation, and we created the campaign, and it was tongue in cheek. It just fell out of my mouth on a conference platform where I said, you know, we're doing this campaign for men and not just a girl's job. And I nicked it off the UK government at the time because they were running the not just a boy's job for getting girls into STEM.
Okay,
science, engineering. So I nicked it off them and just turned it, and it tongue in cheek. And by the time I got off stage, it was going viral on Twitter. So it stuck. And we are one of like a few professions in the UK that's obviously heavily female dominated, 96% female,
yes.
4% male. The male assistants, they're not very impressed with some of what goes on in our industry, to be fair. We have some male assistants on our board, and we do talk about it a lot, and we're reinvigorating the campaign soon, that tells you a lot in itself, that we didn't think we'd have to, but we are now having to do that because I think some of the more gimmicky stuff in our industry doesn't sit so well with them in terms of the professionalism and perception and being taken seriously, because they already have to deal with the fact they're in a female dominated industry. They get a lot of stuff, comments thrown out to them. We've got some of this, some of their quotes that we used from a survey we got on how they get the mick taken out of them, basically, for being in a women's environment. So yeah, a lot of this stuff is quite quick win. I think we can change direction quite quickly here, but we've got to get PAs themselves to understand. Actually, yeah,
I was interested because I find in the chief of staff world, male chiefs of staff do not get confused with being EAs as much as the female chiefs of staff.
I'd say that's fair.
Okay, and I know Allie had her hand raised. I'm not sure if anybody else had their hand raised, but I just wanted to pause because I was curious how, because I know that they're male, I've worked with male EAs. And so I was just curious what that perception of, you know, who you are and that, you know, your little tiara, nurses uniforms, like there's males who are EAs. So how does that even, you know, stretch into their world?
It doesn't. I mean, all this stuff is played out on LinkedIn, which obviously is supposed to be the more professional website out of, well, the social media site, shall we say. Kay's put a comment in. She feels, or at least her perception is, that the US has more men going into assistant roles than we have here in the UK. That seems to be the case. And Emma had made a comment, just going back to thanking you, Leigh, about clarifying what the chief of staff role really is. As someone has suggested that she does the role, and she's just stepping up into an EA role at a new company. Congratulations, Emma. and being
Allie
asked.
I had her hand up. I
Yeah, I
had
thought I saw that.
paused you at the time. I just want to make sure that I don't, if she still has a question.
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
I think I had a thumbs up to some comments from Kay and from you, Victoria, and just in agreement. But I think now that I've turned my mic off, I may as well add something else.
Yeah.
I really think I've been in a support professional for a long time. I did the secretarial school as you did, learnt to type on a typewriter, and I approached a significant birthday this year. So I've been doing the job for a long time as an executive assistant. And I think the sort of work that I'm doing today is really stretching me. Right now, I've got on my screen kind of with a deadline, but I was determined to come on the call too, is really stretching me. I'm planning our board away day. I'm responsible for the content, the purpose and the outcomes. And I very rarely do diary management now. The EA to the CEO does that. I'm the executive support lead, so I line manage the team. I think, and this is a good stretch for me. So the chief of staff role sounds very intriguing and exciting, but I also think it's about finding the right organisation that will stretch you to do the role. And if you are not happy, it might not be it might be the organisation that isn't the right fit for people. I'm in a really great organisation at the moment, which is smaller. I've always worked in really big corporate industries, but I'm in a much smaller organisation now, which is an arm's length body for the government, and we don't have as many people to do the work. So there is more challenging and exciting work for me to do. I'm working constantly with the chief operating officer, somebody that isn't in kind of a chief of staff role who I'm learning so much from. So I think it's great to think about where am I working rather than what is the role I'm doing too, because that can open up opportunities to maybe it's harder sometimes working in a smaller organisation, but there lies the stretch too.
I love that. I love that.
I do.
And that is exactly the point, that you don't need to take on a different title to take on the function. I mean, I, as a chief of staff, if I'm stepping in and I'm helping to support marketing, my title doesn't change, right? It's something that I'm doing to roll up my sleeves to do my job. My job as chief of staff is to be all of these things and to be available and to, and I would say for an EA, the very first thing, regardless of whether you're trying to be a business manager, chief of staff, or moving into, some EAs, like an EA that I work for, her goal is to get into engagement management. And so really looking at field visits, looking at customer and partner engagements. And that's what she does as part of her EA role. She is working and focusing on that. Another EA that I work with really love the finance aspect. I don't see how that's possible personally, but love the finance aspect. And so they're looking at going in that direction. And so what do you enjoy doing? Don't take on the chief of staff role is miserable. I love it because I love the chaos. I love being able to say, it is one of the least C-suite paid positions. So yes, it's in a C-suite, but it's one of the least C-suite paid positions, but it has to act as though, I could be your boss CMO or CFO. And what do you enjoy doing? If you don't enjoy telling people, it's like, oh, this is exactly where you need to do, this is how you need to go. No. Well, as an EA, you have to say no all the time. So I don't think I know any EA that doesn't mind saying no, but, but really saying, this is how we're prioritizing. This is, what you need to go do. If you look at the chief of staff role on its own, and those are not the things that drive your passion, then that's not the function for you. There's things that you can do in the EA role. And the very first thing that I would say for any EA partner that I work with, I consider the EA a member of the leadership team. If you do not feel like you're a member of the leadership team, to me, that is the place to start. It's about making sure the EA role has the presence and the respect that it should have at the organization. So why are you not a member of the leadership team? Are you not a member of the leadership team because you don't have a voice at the table? So, or if you are a member of the leadership team and your role is just to be there and observe, then I would say, okay, I would never have an EA partner who's a member of the leadership team just to be there to observe. Then I don't think you would need to be there. But if you are there because you add a very specific voice that nobody else at that table provides, then I would say, learn how to use your voice. And that's how we all together start getting that respect that we need in our roles. That's why I help. So I specifically coach chiefs of staff, and I help chiefs of staff move and present themselves as chiefs of staff rather than as business managers, because that's what's going to help the chief of staff function. And this is controversial. If somebody is asking you to get a certification to be a chief of staff, the pushback that I always have is, does your chief marketing officer have a certification to be a CMO? Does your chief human resource officer have a certification? This is not project management. It's not like I can get a certification to say that I am a chief of staff. I am a chief of staff. I don't need a certification for that. I just find it hilarious. People say, oh, pay $3,000 to go get your chief of staff certification. Honestly, and I have to say this, I believe it's targeted to EAs. And I believe it's targeted to EAs so they can get that certification and say, well, look, I can be a chief of staff now.
That was
when
my
really that
worry.
certification is really more focused on you being a strategic EA.
I think Angela's got a hand up there. Angela?
Hi. It's just two small things, really. Firstly, just a quick observation, I suppose, about the portrayal of the chief of staff role in the media, certainly what I've seen on TV recently. So 2 shows that maybe you guys are also watching. So Succession, for one, and The Diplomat, which is just a recent one on Netflix, I think. I think the first time I'd really heard here in the UK of chief of staff was Jerry, this amazing character in Succession. And obviously that's from the business world. And I think, you know, that's just me. I'm sure lots of other people in this same profession here are seeing this new role. And I just think it's interesting that we should discuss that here, but also if there's any influence that we can have sort of within the media in whichever way that we can, especially in the UK, to you know, dispel any differences or anything like that. And that can all be done by individuals, obviously. You know, LinkedIn's a huge, powerful tool. So that was my first observation, really. And I think secondly, you know, echoing what a lot of people have said, you know, empowering the role, I think what I've seen sometimes in previous organizations is a little bit of perhaps lack of confidence within certain PAs or EAs. And what I've said to them in sort of a peer mentoring kind of way is, you know, you have to be responsible for bringing that presence and showing them what you can do. Because they may not know, or they may be new to this. So your exec, whoever that is. So you have to show them what you can do and add that value. And if you don't have the experience in certain areas, you go and get it. So some people will call you or think that you're nosy or you've got fingers in pies, but actually no, that's you going in there. And I feel gleaning that information and pulling it out there, perhaps to store that, you know, knowledge for such a role as chief of staff in the future, potentially.
And absolutely. And one of the things that I would say is, if your organization, if your CEO as an EA is giving you a dual EA chief of staff role or trying to somehow push you into the chief of staff role. So my consulting services for chiefs of staff, and I don't know how this translates into pounds, but my consulting rate for big tech chiefs of staff is $600 an hour. So I would go to your chief CEO and say, okay, then I need an exec coach, a chief of staff executive coach, because just like in these companies, your C-suite, they have executive coaches. One of the non-negotiables that I've always had is that I get an executive coach. So even as a chief of staff, I've had an executive coach. And so if they're really saying that this is a dual role, then you should have the same resources that the rest of the C-suite have.
Love it. Love it. And I had an executive coach when I was making the transition to become EA to the CEO, and that was 20 years ago. But I want to talk a little bit more about your book now. So I've been recommending this to UK assistants who are really, seriously interested in making this.
And I hope everybody has it, because it's, so in addition to understanding the chief of staff role, especially as it's getting this huge wave of momentum, and I think it's going to be moving not just in the US, but it's going to be moving broadly, that partnership. And I hope the book does a good job at really talking about that partnership with the EA and the chief of staff, and understanding what I call the swim lanes. So knowing that there are different swim lanes, and when you know your swim lane and you respect each other, it is a phenomenal partnership.
So tell us, for those who haven't got the book, it is, I've checked it out on Amazon UK. You can get it on there and have it delivered tomorrow, even to rural Dorset, as I discovered. We can still get next day delivery, but tell us a little bit about the book and what you were trying to achieve with the book, and how you're helping people.
Yes, so it's called Unlocking Your Inner Chief of Staff. It's on Amazon, and it's interesting. Like I said, there's two things that led me to writing the book. So one was this person telling me that I should, as a senior executive, I should remove the chief of staff headline from my LinkedIn, and because it dilutes me actually being a senior executive. Seriously. Because it's more that you're a chief operating officer, Leigh. It's like, well, but my title was chief of staff, even though so I won't get into that. The dilution of the EA to chief of staff works the same way on the chief of staff side. So people see the EA/chief of staff, and so they start thinking, oh, the chief of staff aren't these executive roles, they're more EA roles. And so it really does it does a disservice to both functions. And so I actually removed that title for a minute off of my LinkedIn. And then, and then that's when I got contacted by the executive recruiter saying, hey, we have the chief of staff role. And I said, based on everything you've said, that doesn't sound like a chief of staff role. I've been a chief of staff for 20 years. I know the chief of staff role. And then I decided when I started doing chief of staff leader circle and getting into executive coaching and getting into fractional chief of staff role, I was going to do a pamphlet, just a fun, cheeky pamphlet. And you'll see even in the book, the way it's designed and organized, that it's based on a character, and it's like a comic book, and like I call it an executive coloring book. Is how I describe it, as an executive coloring book. And and I started it as a pamphlet because I really wanted people to have an introduction to what a true chief of staff is. And if you have a true chief of staff, the value and the impact that role will, not just can, but will have on your organization. And as I started doing it, it just grew and grew. And I was like, oh, but I have to add this, but I have to add this. Oh, I have to add this. And so it just grew until it was like, oh my gosh, this is not a pamphlet. This is a book that helps to really understand and dissect the chief of staff role. And this role is getting so popular that I want to yell it from the rooftops. People, please understand what this role is and the value that it can add. If you put it in handcuffs and you are trying to stifle the role and say, you're a catcher, you're in the meetings to take notes, and you are running around, one role is like you're running around chasing agenda items for the SLT. Heck no. Heck no. And so there's a whole section. My favorite part of the book is a section I call non-negotiables. And so as a true chief of staff, there's a list of non-negotiables that if you're being asked to do a chief of staff role, I would take a look at that. And to me, if you really want to have the title of chief of staff, don't have it just because it's going to get you a little bit more pay. Have it because you're respected as a true chief of staff and operating in that function.
Absolutely love that. And I see Kay has said she's ordered it already. ready to read once you finish your master's degree in September. Full of admiration for you as ever,
Yes.
Kay.
Oh, it's an easy read. You can read it in a day. But because it's not meant to just be it's not a book, it's not meant to just read, it's meant to reflect on. So even as you're thinking about different things in your EA role, you're meant to reflect on certain aspects. Okay, so as we think about the rhythm of the business, okay, what is that really doing and what role do I play as I think about these different pieces? As I'm thinking about the leadership team and the chief of staff in this book, we say one of the non-negotiables is I show up as a leadership team member where the leadership team members show up. You ask yourself as an EA. And I think it's a great reflection for you to go through as an EA. Say, okay, now where do I show up? How do I show up? What are my non-negotiables? And I am no expert on the EA role, so I couldn't write Unlocking Your Inner EA or demanding the respect and the seniority as an EA. I would love to have the opportunity to write that book, but I'm not an expert in that role.
Well, do you know, here's the irony, of course, that when there are books written in the EA world, we have an influx of them every so often, they become out of date so quickly. So in my bookshelves behind me, and sorry, I'm looking like God or an angel Gabriel this afternoon. It's been really, really like clouded weather, and now the sun's just started pouring through. It's your fault, Leigh. I'm not going to complain though, but
Oh, that's a good thing. That is a great thing. I love the sunshine.
Oh, well, it's just started coming through towards the end of the day, but this is how quick the EA role is kind of evoluting. And in fact, one of the network leaders here said she's fed up with hearing the word evolution. Let's call it a revolution, which is, I was like, yeah, and we had this really great conversation. But the books become so outdated here so quickly. So the books I've got behind me now are so out of date on the EA role. That's how quick things have moved in this space. So even if I wrote a book today, it would be out of date by next year. I mean, some of the advice would still be.
But it wouldn't have to be, Victoria, because the way I wrote Unlocking Your Inner Chief of Staff, it is taking not people's knowledge of the chief of staff function today, but it's saying, if we look at what this role can truly contribute in the long run. So most chiefs of staff that are looking at the book say, okay, I do this, I do this, I do this, but there's a third of the book that's not pertinent to them because of how niche each of these roles are. But what it's saying is if we look in the long run, really, if we want to value, so the way I would do an EA book is not as the EA today, but I would do an EA book and say, what is that strategic EA? What is the ultimate utopia of the perfect strategic EA? And so this is what I want to see all strategic EAs be in 10 years. That's the book that I would write.
I will say something now, and it's because Ali and a few others have touched upon it. One thing I have been predicting about the EA role, and I think, and this is not, I say this with no arrogance. I mean, if we were in a room together with PAs now, I might get some tomatoes chucked at me. But given what I've learned and I've seen, and I know about stats and facts in the UK, and having worked in a global HR department as well, the vast majority of assistant roles in 10 years' time will be in SMEs, small, medium enterprises. And predominantly they've been in corporates, but as we've seen these massive layoffs and restructures that have gone on and on and on and on, I predict that most assistant roles will be in the SME market. And Ali touched upon it earlier, because I've worked for startups and entrepreneurs, and that is where the juice is. Sorry to say, but honestly, as an EA, because you don't have the different departments doing stuff for you, right, so you do have the opportunity to really get stuck in. And I'm having quite a hard time selling startup EA roles to mass market here, because they're like, well, I'm used to working in a corporate and we do it like this. But
because of pay or because of what?
I think it is a little bit of that. I think it is a little bit of that, but I think it's because when I came into the kind of secretarial roles, as they were called back then, there was this kind of elitism, like every EA wanted to work in the banks in London. Okay, that's what you were all aspiring to. Okay. Everybody, when I came into the city as teenage Vic, it was, I didn't want to work in the banks, but all of my peer group did. And invariably, that's what they went off to do. And many had wildly successful careers. But as we've gone through restructuring, a global financial recession, we know that layoffs will happen a lot more now with corporate companies. You won't end up there for 20 years, for example. But here's what's happened in the UK just during the lockdown that nobody's talking about. We've had over 380,000 small businesses start up since the lockdowns. And that is since records began, which I believe was 70 years ago. That's the most amount of small businesses that have ever been set up in that period. And so those small businesses are growing at the moment. They're in startup stage. Some of them have jumped on and got an assistant now. Others will get an assistant.
And
it's
really
really
exciting. Like I said at the very beginning of this call, if you're a true CEO and you want to be successful, the number one prioritized role you should hire for is the EA.
Yeah, and I actually asked,
Yes.
I asked just before the lockdowns when we were getting some of this chief of staff, the trend was coming on to LinkedIn. I go out a lot I've got different databases of HR people because I've taken EPAA to exhibit rather than come to the PA shows. I don't go to the PA shows of EPAA. I go into the Lion's Den and I'll go and promote the role there. And I've asked them and I've said, like, what role, if you had the cash, if I gave you the cash now to hire, what would you hire first? And it's an assistant they want.
Period.
And literally they would bite your right arm off to have a great assistant.
Period.
Yeah.
And so it is the role that's in demand and what we need to do. And I am signing up, and you hear me saying it loud and clear. What we need to do is to move that position to get the respect that's necessary for that position to operate as its function. I see that there is a question in the window by Dayla. If I think the chief of staff role has transferable skills to other positions. And there's what I call two different types of chiefs of staff. There's the career chief of staff, and then there's rotational chiefs of staff. So rotational chiefs of staff. So the chief of staff role, like I said, you can should be able to step in at any time to be a CEO. And so people come in as rotational chiefs of staff. So they are running, or they're in lines of business, or they're, they're on the fast track. They're very special employees that are going to be up and coming really quickly. You'll rotate them into a chief of staff role because they can really quickly, in the office of the CEO, understand how to run a business, understand all of the moving pieces and how to negotiate, prioritize, how to direct very, very senior individuals who have their priorities in their line of business. So if you're in finance, legal, product, your priority, even as a strategic leader, your priority is your line of business. So the chief of staff needs to be able to come in and say, yes, I know that's your priority, but our priority as the leadership team is the overall company. So sometimes that might mean that your specific line of business has to be deprioritized. And so they bring in rotational chiefs of staff, which those roles typically last for about 2 years, where you get a taste of what it's like to run the business and to put on those hats and to run yourself ragged, and then you rotate back into the business. So those are definitely transferable skills. Then you have people like myself who are considered career chiefs of staff, who we come in and we run a business and we get, that partnership with the CEO, that partnership with the EA, and that's what we want to do. We want to be, and that's becoming a more prevalent position, whereas the rotational previously was and even when I first started in the chief of staff, when I went to the HR team, I was in marketing. So it was rotational. I wanted to understand how to run a business. I was seen as a fast track employee. And then I was going to go back into PR and AR and marketing and all of that. It just so happened that I loved the chaos of the chief of staff role. I loved, even though people find this strange, I love fighting for the authority to make things happen. And it is a fight because you don't really own anything. And it is a fight. And I love that invigorates me, that excites me. If you are adverse to controversy, then the chief of staff role is probably one that is not quite the one you would want to go for anyway.
Love that. Absolutely love that. Any more questions? I know we're coming to the end now, and thank you, Elizabeth. That's a lovely comment, and that's what we were trying to achieve with today, because I don't profess to be an expert on the chief of staff, but I have worked with chief of staffs via John and Matt, and saw that what that role was doing 20 years ago, and come in, I've gone in and out of different sectors as an EA over the last 20 years and have come across them again. But are there any last burning questions? I mean, I think what I would say to any of you that are serious about making that move, and knowing many of you, as I do as assistants, go to somebody like Leigh who can help coach you through that transition. And, as a starter for 10, just get the book, and then, do it.
And if your company
properly.
pays for coaching, I mean, if they truly
Yeah.
want you to go in that direction, then they should pay for coaching. And so please reach out to me. I do executive coaching for chiefs of staff, and even for I don't do coaching for EAs who want the chief of staff title because they don't get respect as an EA or they want the pay of an EA. I don't do chief of staff coaching in that realm because I don't feel like I'm the person that can help you. I do executive coaching for individuals, regardless of what career path you came from. But if you're coming from an EA path or a finance path or a communications path, I do executive coaching for the chief of staff role to help shore up where are the skills that you need to focus on and what types of special projects can you take on to move in that direction. But you actually have to want to be a chief of staff and not want to just have the title or the pay.
I think one of the last things I have to mention to you is The Apprentice USA.
I was on The Apprentice with Donald Trump. Yes, I was.
Yeah. Come on, you've got to tell us a little bit about it, because were you the first person to say no? I quit.
Yes, so so I was on The Apprentice, so the 3rd season of The Apprentice, and I actually have a YouTube channel, and it's at Leigh Felton. So if you go to YouTube and you just type in at Leigh Felton, you'll see me describe that in depth, what that experience was and how until this year, 90% of my own network did not know that I was on The Apprentice. And so they were shocked just because I've gotten so far in my career and it's like, what, you were on The Apprentice? So yes, I was on The Apprentice with Donald Trump, and I was the first person to say, this is a TV show. I thought this was a real business show. I quit. I'm out of here. And I did a host of interviews and things after that. And people were just like, oh my gosh, you're not the same person that they depicted on the show. It's like, no, because they have all kinds of editing and voiceovers and all of this other stuff. And that's the reason I quit the show. But it was an experience that I wouldn't change for the world, because just like me having that first chief of staff job in HR and really getting a peek under the covers to say, okay, this is what a company is really about. Me having that experience was humbling. And it was humbling.
And that's what I've heard. I know a couple of the people that have been on The Apprentice over the years here. And I actually, one of the most successful in terms of the projects they had to do each week and get money in, for Lord Alan Sugar, who obviously is the main person here. I just want to put this out there to make the assistants feel amazing. But Helen, she was a runner-up in one of the series, I think it was about 10 years ago. She was EA to the CEO of Greggs, which is a big bakery chain here. And she went on to The Apprentice, and she ran one of the projects, was project lead one week, and her team got the highest amount to date of money made. So I just want to say that. And I invited, she came to speak at an EA event and spoke for us and told us what it was like being on The Apprentice. And she said it was so like in the reverse of what she'd been told, that she was completely
it's TV. It's TV. If you're watching it for entertainment and you realize it's TV, I went into it as business because I'm a very serious person. I mean, I am, and that's why I love the chief of staff role. When it comes to being focused in business, I'm focused in business. And if you take it for what it is, it's TV. And the big difference is now it's like, so I was on literally with Donald Trump. So this is when you had Donald Trump and Carol, et cetera. And now that Donald Trump was president of the United States, it's like now there's this whole other perspective that people are coming to me, approaching me about The Apprentice and saying, hey, you were on The Apprentice with the president of the United States. What was that like? And it's just like, it's a big show. It's a big show. I will leave it at that. This has been amazing fun and I hope informative.
Yeah, judging by the comments that have been coming through, and Meg, great that you joined us. So can't wait to get you. You're coming on the podcast soon as well, which is brilliant. Looks like we've got some book sales for you as well, Leigh. And I think for me, I'm not saying to EAs don't go and do it. I'm just saying don't fall for the PR hype that you're seeing in some jazzy marketing. Like, get your ducks in a row, get the information, get the advice, go to people like Leigh. I'm not the expert on this role, but what I will say is I'm seeing this role horrendously missold by, you know, some in our own industry as well, sadly. And I get it, because it's a PR hype and it gets people sold in. I get marketing, you know, I've seen it, and the recruiters are jumping on this bandwagon as well. So just proceed with caution. And don't be afraid to challenge recruiters if you're seeing what Leigh and I've described today, where Leigh gets approached by a chief of staff role and they admit that it's actually an EA role, and vice versa. Challenge away with them. If they're any good at their job, then they will do that properly back with you and have some good conversation.
Because you should be able to have the same pay. So if they're paying you, you should be able to have that same pay as an EA.
And we've got much work to do, and Leigh, and we might have a C between us, but literally I'm going to be staying in touch with you. And
we definitely need to do something, Victoria, because I think we have passion in it, and it's showing up in the same spaces. And it's for two very complementary positions.
I've got some snippets, and I'll ask your permission afterwards when we've cut, and I'll send you this video, but I've got some snippets, and I think Kay or Ali might have picked up on it earlier, where I could literally just snippet something you've said about the EA role and put that out there, and it would just be like, you've said it today, so I'm going to get your approval on that. Thank you very much for everybody that's managed to get on today. I know there's a whole heap of people
for having me.
recording.
I sincerely appreciate being here, and I sincerely appreciate the partnership of the EA. And if we could start, you know, let's do a conference, chiefs of staff and EAs coming together to say we are powerful people and this is what it stands for. And I think that if we create that foundation and that platform to help people understand the respect of both of these roles, I think that we can actually change the industry.
Meg, I was just about to say, let's get you. So let's get. Oh, look, we're getting that. We'll be. Let's do it. I'm going to commit to that. April will help cultivate that, put that together. Okay, I'm going to say, Meg, let's get you on it, because Meg's based in the UK now. Yeah, she's a million times over. Let's do it, Leigh. You and I.
I'll come to the UK if that's. I will come to the UK, Victoria.
I could make that happen. I'd love for you to come here. I can't promise the weather.
Yes.
You've brought the sun to me this afternoon.
And I will bring sunshine, but I'm in Seattle. I don't mind the rain at all. My husband is Danish. And if you know anything about Danish weather, we used to go there a lot more before COVID, but it rains all the time there too. So no matter where I go, I get rain. So I wouldn't mind it if it rained, but absolutely, we need to do something. And as I said, my microphone is about really demonstrating the power of the office of the CEO and the structure of the office of the CEO and the roles of the office of the CEO, because I think that is something that is very, very mysterious right now.
So I love jumping on stuff like that, because, you know, I'm out of corporate now. I'm an entrepreneur and small business owner, so my head is going like this already. So let's commit to getting a Zoom in ASAP with me, you, Meg, and I want to pull Dahlia, our EPA's chair, in as well. Can we do that in the next couple of weeks and start planning this event?
Absolutely. I'm in.
There we go.
I'm in. And you have this on, it's like recorded, right?
Yeah,
so you have my commitment here that I'm in. And I definitely think we should do it.
I think we should do it. The way you've just positioned this is exactly what I would want to do to start changing the messaging and perception and all. I'm really not interested in crowns and the frilly stuff and the candy floss. Listen, we can celebrate once we've sorted all this out, this perception stuff. I've literally champagne for everybody, you know. I'll get you some candy floss. You've got witnesses, yeah.
I have witnesses.
No, I'll do it. Let's do it.
Okay, yeah, we're going to do it. We are going to do it.
Well, thank you very much, Leigh. I hope you have a good rest today. We're sliding into early evening now in the UK, and for anyone that's patching in around the world and Europe, enjoy the rest of your day. I have to run to
another meeting. I have to run, but thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, everybody. And
I'm looking forward to whatever our next steps may be.
And there is a next step there. So thank you, everyone. Emily, don't worry. I'll send you everybody the recording so you can go back over bits and pieces. But thank you. Have a nice day and
bye.
Keep safe.